It will be necessary, therefore, for clearing our way, to fix upon some ordinary characters of a tyrant, which may discriminate him from a magistrate, and be ground of disowning him as such. I shall rehearse some from very much approved authors, the application of which will be as opposite to the two brothers that we have been burdened with, as they had intended a particular and exact description of them. Buchanan, De Jure Regine Epud Scatos, shows, quote, that the word tyrant was at first honorable, being attributed to them that had the full power in their hands, which power was not restricted by any bonds of laws, nor obnoxious to the cognition of judges, and that it was the usual denomination of heroes, and thought at first so honorable that it was attributed to the gods. But as Nero and Judas were sometimes among the Romans and Jews names of greatest account, but afterwards by the faults of two men of these names, it came to pass that the most flagitious would not have these names, given to their children. So in process of time, rulers made this name so infamous by their wicked deeds that all men abhorred it as contagious and pestilentious, and thought it a more light reproach to be called hangman than a tyrant, unquote. Thereafter he condescends upon several characters of a tyrant. Quote, firstly, he that doth not receive a government by the will of the people, but by force invadeth it, or intercepteth it by fraud, is a tyrant, and who domineers over, even over the unwilling, for a king rules by consent, but a tyrant by constraint, and procures the supreme rule without the people's consent, even though for several years they may so govern that the people shall not think it irksome, unquote. Which very well agrees with the present gentleman that rules over us, who, after he was by public vote in Parliament precluded from the government, of which the standing laws of both kingdoms made him incapable for his murders, adulteries, and idolatries, by force and fraud did intercept first an act for his succession in Scotland, and then the actual succession in England, by blood and treachery, usurping and intruding himself into the government without any compact with, or consent of, the people, though he now studies to make himself another Syracusan hero, or the Florentine Cosmo de Medicis, in a mild moderation of his usurped power. But the west of England and the west of Scotland both have felt the force of it. Secondly, he does not govern for the subject's welfare or public utility, but for himself, having no regard to that, but to his own lust, quote, acting in this like robbers who cunningly dispose of what wickedly they have acquired, do seek the praise of justice by injury, and of liberality by robbery. So he can make some show of a civil mind, but so much the less assurance gives he of it, that it is manifest he intends not hereby the subject's good, but the greater security of his own lusts, and stability of empire over posterity, having somewhat mitigated the people's hatred, which, when he had done, he will turn back again to his old manners. For the fruit which is to follow may easily be known, both by the seed and by the sower thereof, unquote. An exact copy of this we have seen within these 2 years, oft before in the rule of the other brother. After God hath been robbed of his prerogatives, the church of her privileges, the state of its laws, and subjects of their liberty and property, he is now affecting the praise and captating the applause of tenderness to conscience and love of peace, by offering now liberty after all his cruelties, wherein all the thinking part of men do discern he is prosecuting a hellish project, introducing popery and slavery, and overturning religion, law, and liberty. Thirdly, the kingly government is according to nature, the tyrannical against it. Principality is the kingly government of a freeman amongst free men. The tyrannical, a government of a master over slaves. Tyranny is against nature and a masterly principality over slaves. Can he be called a father who accounts his subjects slaves, or a shepherd who does not feed but devours his flock, or a pilot who does not always study to make shipwreck of the goods, who doth always study to make shipwreck of the goods, and strikes a leak in the very ship where he sails? Quote, what is he then that bears command, not for the people's advantage, but studies only himself, who leadeth his subjects into manifest snares? He shall not verily be accounted by me either commander, emperor, or governor, unquote. King James VI, also in a speech to the Parliament in the year 1609, makes this one character of a tyrant when he begins to invade his subjects' rights and liberties. And if this be true, then we have not had a king these many years. The foregoing deduction will demonstrate what a slavery we have been under. Fourthly, what is he then who doth not contend for virtue with the good, but to exceed the most flagitious in vices? Quote, if you see then any usurping the royal name, and not excelling in any virtue, but striving to exceed all in baseness, not tendering his subjects good with native affection, but pressing them with proud domination, esteeming the people committed to his trust, not for their safeguard, but for his own gain, will you imagine this man is truly a king? Albeit he vapors with a numerous levy guard, and makes an ostentatious of gorgeous pomp. Unquote. The learned Aetheusius, likewise in his Politics, chapter 38, number 15, as he is cited by Jus Populi, chapter 16, page 347, makes this one character of a tyrant, that, quote, living in luxury, whoredom, greed, and idleness, he neglecteth or is unfit for his office. Unquote. How these suit our times we need not express. What effrontery or impudence is it for such monsters to pretend to rule by virtue of any authority derived by God, who pollute the world with their adulteries and incests, and live in open defiance of all the laws of the universal King, with whom to exceed in all villainies is the way to purchase the countenance of the court, and to aspire to preferment? No Heliogobaldus, etc., could ever come to the length and wickedness that our rulers have professed. Fifthly, he can transfer unto himself the strength of all laws, and abrogate them when he pleases. King James the Sixth, in that foresighted speech, saith, a king degenerate into a tyrant, when he leaveth to rule by law. Aetheusius also, in the foresighted place, saith, quote, there is one kind of tyranny, which consisteth in violating, changing, or removing of fundamental laws, especially such as concern religion. Such, saith he, Philip, the king of Spain, who, contrary to the fundamental Belgic laws, did erect an administration of justice by force of arms, and such was Charles IX of France, that thought to overturn the Salic law. Unquote. All that knoweth what hath been done in Britain these 27 years can attest our laws have been subverted, the reformation of religion overturned, and all our best laws rescinded, and now the penal statutes against papists disabled and stopped, without and against law. Sixthly, he can revoke all things at his nod, at his pleasure. This is also one part of King James VI, character of a tyrant, when he sets up an arbitrary power, and of Aetheusius, in the foresighted place, quote, when he makes use of an absolute power and so breaks all bonds for the good of human society. Unquote. We allow a king an absolute power, taken in a good sense. That is, he is not subaltern nor subordinate to any other prince, but supreme in his own dominions. Or if by absolute he meant perfect, he is most absolute that governs best according to the word of God. But if it be to be loosed from all laws, we think it blasphemy to ascribe it to any creature, where there was ever such an arbitrary and absolute power, arrogated by any mortal, as hath been claimed by our rulers these years past, especially by the present usurper, who, in this liberty of conscience now granted to Scotland, assumes to himself an absolute power, which all are to obey without reserve, which carries the subject's slavery many stages beyond whatever the grand Signor did attempt. Seventhly, for by a tyrant strangers are employed to oppose the subjects. They place the establishment of their authority in the people's weakness, and think that a kingdom is not a procuration concredited to them by God, but rather a prey fallen into their hands. Such are not joined to us by any civil bond or any bond of humanity, but should be accounted the most capital enemies of God and of men. Unquote. King James above says he is a tyrant that imposes unlawful taxes, raises forces, makes war upon his subjects to pillage, plunder, waste, and spoil his kingdoms. Aetheusius, as above, quote, makes a tyrant who by immoderate exactions and the like exhausts the subjects and cites Scripture. Jeremiah 22, verses 13 and 14. Ezekiel 34, verse 1. 1 Kings 12, verse 19. Psalm 14, verse 4, unquote. It is a famous saying of Bracton, he is no longer king than while he rules well, but a tyrant whensoever he oppresseth the people that are trusted to his care and government. And Cicero says, he loseth all legal power in and over an army or empire, who by that government and army does obstruct the welfare of that republic. What oppressions and exactions by armed force our nation hath been wasted with, in part is discovered above. Eighthly, Atheusius, in the place above quoted, makes this another mark, quote, when he keepeth not his faith and promise, but despiseth his very oath made unto the people, unquote. What shall we say of him, who not only brake but burnt, and made it criminal to assert the obligation of the most solemnly transacted covenant with God and with the people that ever was entered into, who yet upon these terms of keeping that covenant only was admitted to the government? And what shall we say of his brother succeeding, who disdains all bonds, whose professed principle is, as a papist, to keep no faith to heretics? Ninthly, in the same place he makes this one character, quote, a tyrant is he, who takes away from one or more members of the commonwealth the free exercise of the orthodox religion, unquote. And the grave author of the impartial enquiry into the administration of affairs in England doth assert on pages 3 and 4, quote, whensoever a prince becomes depraved to that degree of wickedness as to apply and employ his power and interest to debauch and withdraw his subjects from their fealty and obedience to God, or sets himself to extirpate that religion which the Lord hath revealed and appointed to be the rule of our own living and the means of our happiness, he doth by that very deed depose himself, and instead of being owned any longer for a king, ought to be treated as a rebel and traitor against the supreme and universal sovereign, unquote. This is the perfect protractor of our princes, the former of which declared an open war against religion, and all that professed it, and the latter did begin to prosecute it with the same cruelty of persecution, and yet continues without relenting against us, though to others he tolerates it under the notion of a crime, to be for the present dispensed with, until he accomplisheth his design. Tenthly, he tells us, quote, that whosoever for corrupting of youth erecteth stage plays, whorehouses, and other playhouses, and suffers the colleges and other seminaries of learning to be corrupted, unquote. There were never more of this in any age than in the conduct of our court, which, like another Sodom, professes it to be their design to debauch mankind into all villainies by introducing the basest of men into places of teachers, both in church and university, and precluding all access to honest men. 11thly, further he says, quote, he is a tyrant who does not defend his subjects from injuries when he may, but suffereth them to be oppressed, and what if he oppressed them himself, unquote. It was one of the laws of Edward the Confessor, if the king fail in the discharge of his trust and office, he no longer deserves nor ought to enjoy that name. What name do they deserve then, who do not only fail in their duty of defending their subjects, but send out their lictors and bloody executioners to oppress them, neither will suffer them to defend themselves? But Atheusius makes the distinct character of this. Then, in fine, he must certainly be a tyrant, who will not suffer the people by themselves, nor by the representatives, to maintain their own rights, either by law nor force. For, saith my author foresighted, quote, he is a tyrant who hindereth the free suffrages of members of Parliament, so that they dare not speak what they would, and chiefly, he who takes away from the people all power to resist his tyranny, as arms, strengthens, and chief men, whom therefore, though innocent, he hateth, afflicteth, and persecuteth, exhausts their goods and livelihoods without right or reason, unquote. All know that our blades have been all along enemies to parliaments, and when their interest forced to call them, what means were used always to pack and prelimit them, and overawe them, and how men who have faithfully discharged their trust of them have been prosecuted with every height, with the height of envy and fury, and many murdered thereupon, and how all the armed force of the kingdoms have been enhanced into their hand, and the people kept so underfoot that they have been rendered incapable either to defend their own from intestine usurpers or foreign invaders.